He was an elderly doctor who delivered a baby during the worst blizzard in history, and 30 years later, that baby saved his life in the exact same place. Can you imagine risking everything to save a stranger's child, only to have that child grow up and return the favor when you need it most? This isn't just a story about medicine or survival. It's a story about how every act of kindness ripples forward through time in ways we can never predict. This really happened in Nebraska during the winter of 1891, and again in 1921. Before we continue, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because what happened on those 2 Christmas Eves will restore your faith in humanity. What this doctor did in a blinding snowstorm became legend. And what that baby did 30 years later proved that no good deed is ever truly forgotten. Tell me here in the comments, what state are you watching this story from? I'd love to know how far these stories of hope are reaching. It was December 24th, 1891, and Dr. Jonathan Hewitt was preparing to close his medical office in the small town of Sutherland, Nebraska. At 45 years old, Jonathan had been the only doctor serving this vast rural area for nearly 20 years. His territory covered over 50 miles in every direction, servicing homesteaders, ranchers, and the few small settlements scattered across the endless prairie. Jonathan was a tall man, lean from years of hard work and irregular meals, with dark hair just beginning to show silver at the temples. His hands were steady, his eyes sharp, and his reputation was impeccable. He'd set broken bones in the middle of cornfields, delivered babies in sod houses, and once amputated a farmer's leg on a kitchen table to save the man from gangrene. This was frontier medicine, raw and unforgiving, and Jonathan had dedicated his life to it. He had never married. Not because he didn't want to, but because the life of a frontier doctor left little room for family. He was on call every hour of every day. A wife would have been a widow in practice if not in name, so Jonathan lived alone in a small house behind his office, surrounded by medical books and the ghosts of patients he couldn't save. And there were many he couldn't save. That was the hardest part of frontier medicine. So many diseases had no cure. So many injuries were beyond help. So many children died before their first birthday. But Jonathan tried. God, how he tried. Every single time. This particular Christmas Eve, he was exhausted. It had been a brutal December. An outbreak of influenza had killed 7 people in the past 2 weeks, including 2 children. Jonathan had worked around the clock, but it hadn't been enough. He felt the familiar weight of failure pressing on his shoulders as he cleaned his instruments and prepared to go home. Outside, the wind was picking up. Dark clouds massed on the northwestern horizon, heavy and ominous. A blizzard was coming. Everyone in Nebraska knew what that meant. You secured your livestock, stocked your firewood, and stayed inside. Winter storms on the Great Plains were killers. In the blizzard of 1888, just 3 years earlier, over 200 people had frozen to death in Nebraska alone, most of them within 100 yards of shelter they couldn't see through the whiteout conditions. Jonathan was banking his fire and putting on his heavy coat when he heard hoofbeats outside, fast and urgent. A moment later, someone pounded on his door. Dr. Hewitt! Please God, are you still here? Jonathan opened the door to find Henrik Larsson, a Swedish immigrant who homesteaded about 15 miles north of town. Henrik was a good man, hard-working, who'd come to America 5 years ago with his young wife Ingrid seeking a better life. He was covered in snow, his face red from cold and exertion, his eyes wild with panic. Henrik, what's wrong? It's Ingrid, doctor. The baby, it's coming. Something's wrong. She's been in labor for 18 hours. The midwife from the settlement came, but she left. She said the baby is positioned wrong and Ingrid will die without a real doctor. Please, Dr. Hewitt, you have to come. You have to save her. Save them both. Jonathan looked past Henrik at the darkening sky. The first snowflakes were beginning to fall. Henrik, a blizzard is coming. A bad one. 15 miles in that storm. I know. Henrik's voice broke. I know what I'm asking, but she'll die, doctor. My Ingrid will die and the baby too. Please, I'm begging you. Jonathan closed his eyes. He'd taken an oath. First, do no harm. But more than that, do everything in your power to help. Every life was precious. Every life was worth fighting for. He opened his eyes and looked at Henrik's desperate face. Give me 5 minutes to get my bag. Jonathan gathered his medical supplies. Forceps, scalpels, sutures, chloroform, laudanum, clean towels, everything he might need for a complicated delivery. He dressed in his warmest clothes, multiple layers including his heavy buffalo coat and fur-lined gloves. He filled a canteen with whiskey, not for drinking, but for sterilization, and another with water. Henrik had brought an extra horse for him, a sturdy mare. They set out immediately. The ride started manageable. The snow was falling, but not yet heavy. They could see the road ahead. Henrik led the way, pushing hard. He kept looking back at Jonathan, making sure the doctor was keeping up. "How long has she been in labor?" Jonathan called out. "Since yesterday morning. About 18 hours now. The pains are close together, but nothing's happening. And doctor, she's bleeding. Not a lot, but more than the midwife thought was right." Jonathan felt his stomach tighten. 18 hours of labor followed by bleeding could mean several things, none of them good. Placental abruption, uterine rupture, the baby wedged in the birth canal. Without being able to examine Ingrid, he couldn't know. But he knew she was in serious danger. They'd been riding for about half an hour when the blizzard truly hit. It came suddenly, as these storms often did. One moment the snow was light and manageable. The next, it was as if someone had thrown a white curtain over the world. The wind screamed across the open prairie, driving the snow horizontally with stinging force. "Visibility dropped to near zero. Stay close," Henrik shouted, though Jonathan could barely hear him over the wind. "Follow my horse." They slowed to a walk. In whiteout conditions, you couldn't risk going faster. A horse could step in a hole and break its leg. You could ride right off the road without knowing it. People had frozen to death within sight of their own homes because they got disoriented and wandered in circles. Jonathan pulled his scarf up over his nose and mouth, trying to protect his face from the wind. Ice formed on his eyebrows and in his beard. His fingers, even inside gloves, were going numb. The temperature was plummeting. He estimated it was already below zero, and with the wind chill, it felt like 20 or 30 below. This was deadly cold, the kind of cold that killed quickly if you stopped moving. An hour passed, then two. The horses struggled through snow that was now knee-deep and getting deeper. Several times they had to stop because Henrik had lost his bearings. He'd get down from his horse, try to find some landmark, a fence post or a distinctive tree, anything to orient himself. Each stop meant exposure to that killing wind. Each time they started again, Jonathan wondered if they'd actually make it. 3 hours into the journey, disaster struck. Henrik's horse, in the lead, stepped into a hidden drainage ditch obscured by the snow. The horse went down hard, throwing Henrik. Jonathan managed to stop his mare just in time to avoid running into them. He dismounted, fighting through the deep snow to reach Henrik, who was struggling to stand. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, but my horse." The animal was trying to rise, but couldn't put weight on its right front leg. Henrik examined it and cursed in Swedish. "The leg is broken. I have to—" He pulled his pistol. The shot was muffled by the wind and snow. The horse collapsed, dead, a mercy in the end. But now they had a bigger problem. "We'll ride double on my horse," Jonathan said. "She's strong. She can carry us both." "No, doctor. We're still 8 miles from my farm. Your horse can't carry 2 men that far in this snow. She'll collapse and then we'll both freeze to death." "What are you suggesting?" "You ride. I'll walk alongside. We keep moving. We stay warm enough to survive. If I ride and you walk, you'll freeze. You're older, lighter. I'm young and strong. I can make it." It was insane. Walking 8 miles through a blizzard was almost certainly fatal. But Henrik was right about the horse. She was already laboring under Jonathan's weight alone. 2 men would be too much. "Henrik, you could die. My wife is definitely dying if you don't get there. Doctor, please. For Ingrid. For my child." Jonathan climbed back on the mare. Henrik grabbed hold of the saddle and they began moving forward again, slower now. Henrik trudged through the snow, holding the saddle for support, using the horse as a windbreak. Jonathan rode, feeling guilty that he was mounted while this man walked through hell. Another hour passed. Then another. Jonathan lost all sense of time. Everything became a white blur of cold and exhaustion. His face was numb. His feet were blocks of ice in his boots. He couldn't feel his fingers anymore. The only thing that kept him conscious was watching Henrik, making sure the man didn't fall, didn't stop. Because if Henrik stopped, he would die within minutes. Several times Henrik stumbled and Jonathan had to help him back up. The man was reaching his limits. Jonathan shared his whiskey canteen, making Henrik drink a few swallows for warmth, though he knew alcohol actually lowered core temperature. But sometimes the psychological warmth was worth it. They talked, shouting over the wind, about anything and everything. About Sweden, about Nebraska, about Ingrid, about medicine, about faith. Anything to keep Henrik conscious and moving. Tell me about when you met Ingrid, Jonathan called down. Henrik smiled through his frozen beard. In Stockholm. She was a shopkeeper's daughter. I was nobody, just a laborer. But I saw her and I knew. You know, doctor? Just knew she was meant for me. Took me 2 years to convince her father I was worthy. Then we came here for land, for opportunity. This baby, this is our future. Our American dream. You'll see your child born, Jonathan promised, though he didn't know if he could keep that promise. You'll hold your son or daughter in your arms tonight. From your mouth to God's ears, doctor. Finally, incredibly, they saw lights ahead. Faint yellow glows barely visible through the snow. The Larson homestead. They'd made it. It had taken 7 hours to travel 15 miles, but they'd made it. Henrik let out a cry of relief and found new strength, pushing forward faster. They reached the small sod house, and Henrik pounded on the door. It opened immediately. Warm air and lamplight spilled out. A woman, the midwife, stood there with a grim face. She's still alive, the midwife said, but barely. And the baby hasn't moved in an hour. I think we've lost it. Not yet, Jonathan said, stumbling inside. Not yet. The house was small, one main room with a curtained-off sleeping area. In that sleeping area, on a narrow bed, lay Ingrid Larson. She was 23 years old, with blonde hair plastered to her head with sweat despite the cold. Her face was pale, her lips nearly blue. Her eyes opened when she saw Jonathan, and something like hope flickered there. Doctor, I'm here, Ingrid. I'm going to help you. You and your baby. Jonathan stripped off his frozen outer clothes and immediately went to work. He washed his hands in hot water the midwife had prepared, then examined Ingrid. What he found was not good. The baby was in breech position, buttocks first instead of head first, and had rotated wrong. One of the baby's arms was caught above its head, and Ingrid had been pushing so long she was utterly exhausted. She had no strength left. Without intervention, both mother and child would die within hours. Ingrid, I need to manually turn the baby, Jonathan said, keeping his voice calm and professional, though inside he was terrified. This was one of the most dangerous procedures in obstetrics. One wrong move and he could rupture her uterus, killing them both. It's going to hurt. I have chloroform, but in your weakened state, I'm afraid to use too much. Do you understand? Do what you must, Ingrid whispered. Save my baby. Promise me. If you can only save one, save my baby. I'm going to save you both, Jonathan said firmly. He turned to the midwife. I need you to monitor her heartbeat. If it becomes irregular, tell me immediately. He looked at Henrik, who stood frozen by the door, covered in snow and ice, his face a mask of terror and hope. Henrik, I need you to hold your wife's hand. Talk to her. Keep her focused on you. Jonathan administered a small dose of chloroform, just enough to take the edge off, but not enough to depress Ingrid's breathing. Then he began the procedure. He had to reach inside, find the baby's arm, manipulate it back down alongside its body, then rotate the entire baby to get it into the correct position. It required delicacy, strength, and intimate knowledge of anatomy. One mistake could be fatal. Ingrid screamed despite the chloroform. Henrik held her, tears streaming down his face, whispering to her in Swedish. Words of love, words of encouragement, prayers. The midwife called out heartbeats, keeping count. And Jonathan worked with a focus so intense the rest of the world ceased to exist. There was only his hands, the baby, and the desperate need to save these 2 lives. 20 minutes later, sweat dripping down his face despite the cold room, Jonathan felt the baby shift into position. Head down. Correct presentation. We're ready, he said. Ingrid, on the next contraction you need to push. I know you're exhausted. I know you have nothing left. But you need to find something. Deep inside. For your baby. Can you do that? Ingrid's eyes met his. In them he saw steel, saw determination, saw a mother's love. Yes, the next contraction came. Ingrid pushed with everything she had. Jonathan guided the baby, supporting the head. Again, another push. You're doing it, Ingrid. The head is crowning. One more, just one more. With a final agonized push, the baby slid free into Jonathan's hands. It was a boy, but he wasn't breathing. The umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck, cutting off oxygen. His skin was blue. Stillborn, the midwife would say. Dead, but Jonathan refused to accept that. He quickly cut and clamped the cord, cleared the baby's mouth and nose of mucus with his finger, and began to breathe for the child. Mouth to mouth, tiny puffs of air into tiny lungs. Nothing. He turned the baby over and struck his back firmly, trying to dislodge any obstruction. Nothing. Henrik was making a sound, a low moan of despair. Ingrid was crying, reaching for her dead baby. Jonathan laid the baby on his back and began compressions. His hands almost completely covered the tiny chest. Gentle compressions, exactly as he'd read in a recent medical journal from Germany, a new technique some doctors were trying. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Come on, Jonathan whispered. Come on, little one, fight. Your parents fought through hell to give you life. You fight too. Come on. 1 minute of compressions and breathing. 2 minutes. 3. The midwife touched his shoulder. Doctor, it's been too long. He's gone. He's not gone until I say he's gone. Jonathan snapped and continued. 4 minutes. His arms were aching. His back screamed in pain from bending over. But he wouldn't stop. Couldn't stop. 5 minutes and then a flutter, the tiniest movement of the baby's chest. On its own. Jonathan stopped compressions, watching, barely breathing himself. Another flutter. Then a gasping breath, small, weak, but a breath. The baby's skin began to turn from blue to gray to pink. His tiny fists clenched. His eyes, which had been half open and unseeing, squeezed shut. And then, like the most beautiful music Jonathan had ever heard, the baby cried. It was a weak cry, barely more than a mule, but it was life. It was victory. It was a Christmas miracle. He's breathing, Jonathan said, and his voice broke. He's alive. Henrik collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Ingrid held out her arms, and Jonathan placed the baby on her chest. The infant immediately quieted, feeling his mother's warmth, hearing her heartbeat. Mother and child together, both alive. Jonathan tended to Ingrid's afterbirth, stitched a small tear, made sure she was stable. She'd lost blood, but not dangerously so. With rest and good food, she'd recover fully. The baby, though small and having had a rough start, was breathing regularly now, his color good, his movement strong. Against all odds, they'd both survived. As dawn broke on Christmas morning, the blizzard finally began to ease. Jonathan sat in a chair near the fire, holding a cup of coffee that Henrik had forced into his hands. He was so exhausted he could barely keep his eyes open. His hands trembled from spent adrenaline, but he felt a deep, profound satisfaction. This was why he'd become a doctor. This moment, this feeling of having snatched 2 lives from death's grip. Henrik sat beside him. Dr. Hewitt, I don't know how to thank you. You risked your life to get here. You worked a miracle. I have no money to pay you, nothing of value. Henrik, seeing that baby breathe is payment enough. No, doctor. It's not. You'll never go unpaid in my home. You'll always have a place at my table, food when you're hungry, shelter when you need it. And I'm going to tell my son, every day of his life, about the man who saved him. About how you rode through the worst blizzard in years. How you walked when you should have ridden. How you worked on him for 5 full minutes when anyone else would have given up. He'll know your name. He'll honor your name. What are you going to call him? Ingrid spoke from the bed, her voice weak but happy. Jonathan. After you, Doctor. Jonathan Larson. So he'll carry your name through his life. Jonathan felt tears sting his eyes, the first time he'd cried in years. That's an honor I don't deserve. You deserve it more than anyone, Henrik said. He stood and went to a corner of the room, returning with a small wooden cross. It was beautifully carved despite Henrik's rough hands, smooth and intricate. I made this for our Christmas tree, but I want you to have it, to remember this night. To remember that you brought life into the world on the night our Savior was born. Jonathan took the cross, holding it gently. Thank you, Henrik. Thank you, Ingrid. I'll treasure this always. He stayed at the Larson homestead for 2 days, making sure mother and child remained stable. Henrik insisted he rest, recover from his own near freezing. On the 2nd day, the roads were clear enough to travel, and Jonathan rode back to Sutherland. The wooden cross went into his medical office, placed on his desk where he could see it every day. Over the years, the story spread. The doctor who rode through the blizzard of '91 to deliver a baby became legend in the region. Patients would mention it when they came to see him. Other doctors would ask him about it at medical conferences. Journalists from Omaha came to interview him. But Jonathan always downplayed his role. I just did my job, he'd say. Any doctor would have done the same, but they wouldn't have. And everyone knew it. The Larson family stayed in touch. Every Christmas, Henrik would bring Jonathan a small gift, firewood, preserves, once a hand-knit scarf Ingrid had made. And young Jonathan Larson would come along, growing bigger each year. As a boy, he'd sit in the doctor's office, wide-eyed, listening to medical discussions. "I'm going to be a doctor like you someday," the boy told Jonathan when he was about 10 years old. "That's a fine ambition," Dr. Hewitt replied. "The world needs good doctors. Mama says you're the best doctor in Nebraska. Your mama is very kind. But I'm just a man who tries his best." Time passed, as it always does. Jonathan Hewitt continued his practice, aging gracefully into his 50s, then 60s, then 70s. His hair turned completely white. His hands, once so steady, developed a slight tremor. His back ached on cold mornings. But he kept working. What else would he do? Medicine was his life. Henrik Larson died when young Jonathan was 15. A farming accident. A overturned tractor. Dr. Hewitt tried to save him but couldn't. The injuries were too severe. It was one of the hardest losses of his career. Watching a man he'd come to love like a brother slip away despite everything he tried. Ingrid passed 5 years later from pneumonia. Dr. Hewitt was with her at the end, holding her hand. "Take care of my Jonathan," she whispered. "He's going to do great things. Because of you." "Because of himself," Jonathan Hewitt replied. "He's a fine young man. You and Henrik raised him well." Young Jonathan Larson, now 20 years old, stayed in the area, working his parents' farm. He was strong, capable, with his father's build and his mother's gentle kindness. He'd wanted to become a doctor, but after his father's death, he'd had to take over the farm to support his mother. Then after her death, he continued farming because it was what he knew. But he never forgot Dr. Hewitt, visited him regularly, brought him fresh milk and eggs, made sure the elderly doctor's firewood was stocked. "You don't have to take care of me, Jonathan," Dr. Hewitt would say. "I'm supposed to be the one taking care of people." "You saved my life before I even knew what life was," Jonathan would reply. "Let me repay that however I can." And so we come to December 24th, 1921, exactly 30 years after that legendary Christmas Eve. Dr. Jonathan Hewitt was 75 years old now. He'd finally taken on a young assistant, a recent medical school graduate named Thomas, who handled most of the routine cases. But Hewitt still came to the office every day, still saw patients who specifically requested him, still couldn't quite let go of the practice that had defined his entire adult life. That afternoon, as he was preparing to close the office for Christmas, he felt it. A pressure in his chest, a tightness, pain radiating down his left arm. He recognized it immediately. Myocardial infarction, heart attack. He was a doctor. He knew exactly what was happening, and he knew it was bad. "Thomas," he called out, but his assistant had already left for the day. The office was empty. The street outside was quiet. Everyone was home with their families, as they should be. It was Christmas Eve. Jonathan tried to walk to the door, to call for help, but the pain intensified. His legs gave out. He collapsed to the floor of his office among the instruments and medicines that had been his life's work. He managed to crawl to his medicine cabinet, pull himself up enough to reach a bottle of morphine. His hands shook as he prepared a syringe, injected himself. The pain eased slightly, but not much. He knew what this meant. Without immediate help, without hospital care, he was going to die. Here, alone, on Christmas Eve. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd saved so many lives on Christmas Eves over the years, and now he'd die on one. He thought about his life. The patients he'd saved, the ones he'd lost, the endless miles traveled in all weather to reach people in need. The loneliness of coming home to an empty house every night. Had it been worth it? He thought of little Jonathan Larson, blue and lifeless in his hands, and how he'd refused to give up. Thought of Ingrid's tears of joy, Henrik's gratitude. Yes, it had been worth it. Every sacrifice, every lonely night, every loss, because of the lives he'd saved, because of the difference he'd made. He'd lived a good life, a meaningful life. If he died now, he died content. But he didn't want to die. Not yet. There was still work to do. Still patients who needed him. He tried to stand again, made it to his knees, then collapsed once more. The morphine was making him drowsy. He could feel his consciousness slipping. No, he thought, not like this. Not alone on the floor. And then he heard it. Footsteps outside. The office door opening. "Hello, Dr. Hewitt. Are you here? I saw your light." A young man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, snow dusting his coat. He stopped when he saw Jonathan on the floor. "Doctor? What happened?" He rushed over, kneeling beside Jonathan. "My heart," Jonathan managed to whisper. "Heart attack. Need hospital." The young man's face was familiar, but Jonathan's vision was blurring. He couldn't quite place him. "The hospital is in North Platte. 15 miles. Sir, can you stand? Can you walk?" "No, can't. Just let me rest here. Go. Get your family. Christmas." "I'm not leaving you." The young man stood, looked around, then made a decision. He lifted Jonathan as if he weighed nothing, carried him out of the office into the cold night air. A wagon stood at the hitching post. The man placed Jonathan in the back, arranging blankets around him. "Sir, I'm going to get you to that hospital. Just hold on." As the man climbed into the driver's seat and snapped the reins, Jonathan tried to see his face. Who are you?" The man turned back. "My name is Jonathan Larson, doctor. You delivered me 30 years ago tonight, in a blizzard. My father told me the story my whole life. How you rode through hell to save me and my mother. How you worked on me for 5 minutes when I wasn't breathing. How you gave me life." Dr. Hewitt's eyes widened. "The baby, the little blue baby who wouldn't breathe. All grown up, strong, capable, and now, saving him. I can't let you do this," Jonathan whispered. "Blizzard coming?" "I know," Jonathan Larson said, looking at the darkening sky where snow was just beginning to fall. "My father told me about that night. How dangerous it was. How you nearly died getting to our farm. And he made me promise something before he passed. He said, if Dr. Hewitt ever needs help, if he ever needs anything, you drop everything and you help him. Because he gave you life, and a debt like that is never fully repaid. But you try. You always try." The wagon lurched forward. Jonathan Larson drove like a man possessed, urging his horses into the growing storm. And Dr. Hewitt, in the back of the wagon, clutching his chest in pain, felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not just hope, but a sense of rightness, a sense of completion, the circle closing. He'd saved this boy 3 decades ago. Now the boy was saving him, on the same night, in the same kind of storm. It was impossible. It was perfect. The blizzard intensified quickly, just as it had 30 years before. Snow fell thick and fast, driven by howling winds. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. But Jonathan Larson didn't slow down. He knew these roads, had traveled them his whole life, knew every turn, every landmark, and more than that, he had purpose. The same kind of desperate purpose that had driven Dr. Hewitt through that long-ago storm. 5 miles out, a tree had fallen across the road. Jonathan stopped the wagon, checked on Dr. Hewitt, who was conscious, but barely, then spent 10 minutes in the freezing wind clearing enough of the tree to pass. His hands were raw and bleeding by the time he finished, but he didn't stop. He climbed back on the wagon and pushed forward. 8 miles out, they came to a bridge over a frozen creek. The bridge looked unstable, weakened by the weather. Jonathan tested it carefully. The wood groaned under weight. He made a decision. He led the horses across slowly, so slowly, distributing the weight as evenly as possible. Halfway across, there was a crack. Dr. Hewitt heard it even through his haze of pain. But the bridge held, barely. They made it across. 12 miles out, Dr. Hewitt stopped breathing. Jonathan heard it. The sudden silence from the back of the wagon. No breath sounds, no movement. He pulled the horses to a stop, climbed back. Dr. Hewitt's face was gray. His lips blue, his chest still. "No," Jonathan said. "No, you don't get to die. Not after everything." He'd helped deliver calves on the farm, helped revive a horse once that had nearly drowned. He knew the principle. He tilted Dr. Hewitt's head back, cleared his airway, and began compressions. Hard, rhythmic pushes to the chest. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths, just like the old doctor had done for him 3 decades ago. Except Jonathan didn't know that. Didn't know he was mirroring the exact technique that had saved his own life. He worked for 2 minutes, 3. His arms burned. His back ached. But he didn't stop. And then miraculously, Dr. Hewitt gasped. His eyes fluttered. He was breathing again, weak, shallow, but breathing. "That's it," Jonathan said. "You keep breathing. We're almost there. Just hold on. Just a little longer." He drove on, pushing the horses as hard as he dared. The blizzard raged around them, but Jonathan never wavered. Never doubted. He would get the doctor to the hospital. He would save this man, because this man had saved him, and because it was the right thing to do. The only thing to do. 14 miles out, one of his horses stumbled. Jonathan felt the wagon lurch, nearly tip. He pulled hard on the reins, straightened it out. The horse recovered, but it was limping now, injured, but they were so close. Just one more mile. Come on, girl, Jonathan urged. Just one more mile. You can do it. The horse pushed on, brave and loyal. And finally, through the snow and darkness, Jonathan saw lights. North Platte. The hospital. They'd made it. He drove right up to the emergency entrance, jumped down, and ran inside. Help! I need help! Heart attack patient! Doctors and nurses rushed out. They carried Dr. Hewitt inside on a stretcher, running. Jonathan followed, but they stopped him at the surgery doors. You can't go in. You need to wait here. We'll do everything we can. Jonathan collapsed into a chair in the waiting room. He was covered in snow, his clothes soaked through, his hands numb, his body shaking from cold and exhaustion. But he'd done it. He'd gotten the doctor here. The rest was up to God and the medical staff. Hours passed. Jonathan sat in that chair, waiting. Other people came and went. A nurse brought him coffee and a blanket. That was incredibly brave, she said. Driving through that storm. Most people wouldn't have tried. He would have, Jonathan said simply. For me, he did. 30 years ago. The nurse looked confused, but didn't press. At 6:30 in the morning, a surgeon emerged. He looked tired, but satisfied. He's alive. It was very close. We nearly lost him twice on the table. But he's stable now. He'll need weeks of recovery, but he should make it. You saved his life, young man. Another half hour and we wouldn't have been able to help him. Jonathan felt his eyes fill with tears. Can I see him? He's sedated. He won't know you're there. I know. But I need to see him. They led Jonathan to a recovery room. Dr. Hewitt lay in a bed, looking small and fragile, so different from the commanding figure Jonathan remembered from his childhood. His face was pale, his breathing assisted by oxygen, his chest wrapped in bandages. But he was alive. Jonathan sat beside the bed and took the old man's hand. You saved me when I had no chance, he said quietly. You breathed life into me when I was already gone. Tonight I got to return that gift. We're even now, Dr. Hewitt. You and me, even. But they weren't even. They never would be. Because this was what Dr. Hewitt had always understood. You don't save a life to create a debt. You save a life because that's what humans do. That's what separates us from the darkness, our willingness to sacrifice for each other, to risk everything for a stranger, to choose love over fear, again and again and again. Dr. Hewitt remained in the hospital for 2 weeks. Jonathan visited every day. As the old doctor recovered, they talked for hours. About medicine, about farming, about Henrik and Ingrid, about all the years that had passed. Your father was a good man, Dr. Hewitt said, one of the best I ever knew. He talked about you until the day he died. You were his hero. I was just doing my job. No, doctor. You were doing more than your job. You were living out what it means to be truly human, to care about others more than yourself. Papa wanted me to be a doctor like you, but after he died, I had to take over the farm. You became exactly what you needed to be, Dr. Hewitt interrupted. A good man. A courageous man. A man who drives through blizzards to save old doctors. Your father would be so proud of you. And your mother. And I'm proud of you too, Jonathan. When Dr. Hewitt was finally released from the hospital, Jonathan drove him home. Not in a wagon this time, but in a new Ford Model T truck he'd bought. Times were changing. The frontier was fading. But some things remained constant. Courage, compassion, the bonds between souls who'd touched each other's lives. At Dr. Hewitt's house, Jonathan helped him inside, got him settled. You need someone to look after you for a while, Tentar Novamente, our continuer doctor. You can't be living alone in this condition. I'll manage. I always have. No, sir. With respect, you won't manage. I'm going to check on you every day until you're back on your feet. And I'm going to make sure you have everything you need. Dr. Hewitt smiled. A tired but genuine smile. You sound just like your father. I'll take that as the highest compliment. Before Jonathan left, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. I want you to have this back. And I want to give you something else. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal the small wooden cross that Henrik had carved 30 years ago. Dr. Hewitt had kept it on his desk all these years, but it must have been in his coat pocket that night. Jonathan must have found it. I know this meant a lot to you, Jonathan said. But I want you to have it together with this. He pulled out another cross, larger and more elaborate than the first. It was beautifully carved from oak, with intricate details that showed years of practice and skill. On it were carved 2 dates and 2 phrases. December 25th, 1891, life given. December 25th, 1921, life returned. Dr. Hewitt took the crosses with trembling hands. His eyes filled with tears. "Jonathan, this is—" "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, doctor. You've already said everything that matters. You said it 30 years ago when you didn't give up on me. When anyone else would have pronounced me dead, you kept fighting. You kept trying, and because of that I got to grow up. I got to know my parents. I got to live. And tonight, I got to save you. That's not coincidence, doctor. That's God. That's grace. That's the proof that no good deed ever truly ends. It ripples forward forever." Dr. Hewitt held the crosses to his chest, unable to speak through his emotion. Jonathan squeezed his shoulder. "Merry Christmas, Dr. Hewitt. Thank you for my life. All of it." In the weeks and months that followed, Dr. Hewitt recovered slowly but steadily. True to his word, Jonathan visited every day. He brought food, firewood, company. They became not just patient and doctor, not just saved and savior, but genuine friends. And as they talked, an idea began to form in Dr. Hewitt's mind. "Jonathan, do you still want to be a doctor?" he asked one afternoon in early spring. I did, but that door closed a long time ago. I couldn't afford medical school, and now I'm 30 years old. Too old to start. You're never too old to pursue your calling. And you don't need formal medical school if you have the right teacher. In my day, most doctors learned through apprenticeship. They studied under an experienced physician, learned by doing. I could teach you, here. You could work with me, learn everything I know. In a few years, you could take your medical boards, become licensed. Take over my practice when I retire. Jonathan stared at him. "Doctor, I couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. More than that, I'm begging. I'm 75 years old. I don't have many years left to practice. But I have knowledge, experience, decades of learning that will die with me unless I pass it on. I want to teach you, Jonathan. I want my last great act as a doctor to be creating another doctor. Especially you. Especially the boy whose life I fought so hard to save. Let me see what you become. Let me be part of that." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, God, yes. I would be honored." And so began the final chapter of Dr. Jonathan Hewitt's career. He took Jonathan Larson on as his apprentice and student. They worked side by side, Jonathan absorbing everything like a sponge. He was a natural, had a gentle bedside manner, steady hands, and an intuitive understanding of anatomy and physiology. More than that, he had compassion. The kind of deep, genuine compassion that can't be taught, only lived. Dr. Hewitt sold Jonathan his father's old farm at a generous price, which gave Jonathan the financial stability to pursue medicine. Jonathan hired a neighbor to work the land while he studied. He read every medical book in Dr. Hewitt's extensive library, practiced sutures on pig hide, learned to set bones on wooden models, observed surgeries, assisted in deliveries, and Dr. Hewitt watched with pride and satisfaction as this young man, this baby he'd pulled from the edge of death, blossomed into an exceptional physician. "You're going to be better than me," Dr. Hewitt told him one day. "You already have the skills. And you have something I always struggled with, balance. You have a life outside medicine, friends, a community. Don't make my mistake, Jonathan. Don't let medicine be your only love. Find a wife, have children, build a family." "Did you ever regret not having a family, doctor?" Jonathan asked gently. Dr. Hewitt was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. Late at night, coming home to an empty house, I'd feel the loneliness like a physical weight. But then I'd remember all the lives I'd touched, all the babies I'd brought into the world, all the patients I'd saved. And I realized I did have a family, a huge family. Every person I'd ever helped, they were my family. And that was enough." "That had to be enough. You have a family, doctor. You have me. You'll always have me." Dr. Hewitt smiled. "I know. And that's a greater gift than you realize." In 1924, 3 years after that fateful Christmas Eve rescue, Jonathan Larson took and passed his medical board examinations. He was officially Dr. Jonathan Larson now. There was a small celebration in Sutherland. The whole town came. Everyone knew the story by now. The doctor who'd saved the baby in the blizzard of 91, and the baby who'd grown up to save the doctor in the blizzard of 21. It had become legend, told and retold, embellished with each telling. But the core truth remained. 2 lives, 2 blizzards, 30 years apart, perfect symmetry. Dr. Hewitt stood at that celebration, leaning on a cane now, his hair pure white, his body frail. But his eyes were bright as he watched young Dr. Larson accept congratulations. "That's my student," he told anyone who would listen. "I taught him everything he knows. Well, everything except courage, that he was born with." That fall, Dr. Hewitt became ill, pneumonia. At 78 years old, his body simply didn't have the strength to fight it off. He took to his bed and young Dr. Larson cared for him. Tried every treatment he knew, but some things even medicine can't fix. On a quiet October evening, with golden autumn light streaming through the windows, Dr. Hewitt called Jonathan to his bedside. "I'm dying, son," he said, his voice a whisper. "We both know it. Don't say that. You're going to recover. You just need rest, Jonathan. Stop being a doctor for a moment and just be my friend. Let me say what I need to say." Jonathan fell silent, taking the old man's hand. "I've had a good life," Dr. Hewitt continued. "A long life. I've saved lives, eased suffering, brought babies into the world. I've done the work I was meant to do. And in my final years, I got to know you, got to teach you, got to see you become the doctor I always hoped you'd be. That's more than most men get. That's enough. It's not enough. I need more time with you. There's so much more to learn. You know everything you need to know. The rest you'll learn by doing, by caring, by never giving up even when it seems hopeless. Just like that Christmas Eve 30 years ago. You remember what I told your parents? When they tried to thank me, you said seeing me breathe was payment enough, and it was. But seeing you become a doctor, seeing the man you've become, that's more than payment. That's legacy. That's immortality. Because long after I'm gone, you'll be here, saving lives, easing suffering, bringing hope. And every time you do, a part of me will be there too. That's how we live forever, Jonathan. Not through monuments or fame, but through the lives we touch, through the people we teach, through the good we do that ripples forward long after we're dust." Jonathan was crying openly now. "I love you. I know I never said it, but I do. You're like a father to me. More than a teacher, a father. And you're the son I never had. The greatest gift of my life. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for saving me that night. Not just my body, but giving my life meaning in its final years. Thank you." That night, Dr. Jonathan Hewitt passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 78 years old. He'd been a doctor for 53 years. He'd delivered over 800 babies, set countless broken bones, performed hundreds of surgeries, and saved more lives than anyone could count. His funeral was held on a bright autumn day. The church was packed. People came from all over Nebraska, even from neighboring states. Patients he'd treated, people whose lives he'd touched. The church couldn't hold them all. People stood outside, hundreds of them, silent and respectful. Jonathan Larson delivered the eulogy. He stood at the pulpit, looking out at the sea of faces, and he told the story. The whole story. About the blizzard of 1891, about his difficult birth, about how he'd been born dead, about how Dr. Hewitt had refused to give up, had worked on him for 5 minutes, bringing him back from the void. About growing up hearing that story, about his father's promise, and then about that Christmas Eve in 1921, 30 years later, when he'd found Dr. Hewitt dying on his office floor, about the decision to risk everything to save him, about the journey through the second blizzard, about bringing him back, just as Dr. Hewitt had brought Jonathan back decades before. Dr. Hewitt used to say that being a doctor wasn't about the medicine, Jonathan said. It was about the caring, about seeing every patient as a human being, a person with hopes and fears, and people who loved them. About never giving up, even when the odds seem impossible. About choosing to fight for life, every single time. He held up the 2 wooden crosses which he'd brought with him. "My father made this one for Dr. Hewitt 30 years ago, the night I was born. And I made this one for him 3 years ago, the night I saved his life. They represent the same truth, that no act of kindness is ever wasted. That what we give comes back to us, sometimes in ways we never expect. And that love, true, selfless love, is the only thing that really matters in this world." He looked at the coffin where Dr. Hewitt lay. "You taught me how to be a doctor. But more importantly, you taught me how to be a man, how to live with purpose, how to serve others, how to face fear and keep going anyway. And you taught me that we're all connected, all part of one human family. And what we do for each other echoes through time." Jonathan placed both crosses in the coffin, one on each side of Dr. Hewitt's folded hands. "Rest well, doctor. You earned it. And thank you." Thank you for my life. Thank you for your example. Thank you for everything. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Dr. Hewitt was buried in the Sutherland Cemetery, under an oak tree, with a simple headstone that read, Dr. Jonathan Hewitt, 1846-1929. He saved lives, he saved souls, he saved us all. Dr. Jonathan Larson took over the practice completely, and he ran it exactly as Dr. Hewitt had, with compassion, dedication, and an absolute refusal to give up on any patient. He became legendary in his own right, carrying on the tradition of frontier medicine even as the frontier itself was disappearing. He married a schoolteacher named Emma in 1925. They had 4 children. 2 of them became doctors. 1 became a nurse. The 4th became a teacher. All of them grew up hearing the story of the 2 blizzards, the 2 Jonathans, and the circle of life and debt and love that connected them. Dr. Jonathan Larson practiced medicine until he was 70 years old. He delivered over 1,000 babies, including the grandchildren of some of the babies Dr. Hewitt had delivered. He saw the advent of antibiotics, which made so many of the diseases that had killed his patients curable. He saw the rise of modern hospitals and the slow decline of the house call. But he never forgot where he came from, never forgot the lessons Dr. Hewitt taught him. When he finally retired in 1961, there was another town celebration. Dr. Larson, now 70 years old with white hair and gentle eyes that had seen so much, stood before the crowd and told the story one more time, about Dr. Hewitt, about the blizzards, about second chances and the ripple effects of kindness. I was born dead, he said, but a good man refused to accept that. He fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. And 30 years later, I got to fight for him. That's what we do for each other. That's what it means to be human. We fight for each other. We save each other. We love each other. And that love, that caring, it never dies. It just keeps going, passed from generation to generation, life to life, heart to heart. He looked at his own children and grandchildren in the crowd. Dr. Hewitt saved me. I saved him, and together we saved hundreds more. And those hundreds will save thousands, and on it goes forever. That's the real miracle. Not that one man rode through a blizzard to deliver a baby, but that the baby grew up to honor that sacrifice by living a life of service, by becoming a man who would ride through his own blizzard to save the man who'd saved him. That's grace. That's the best of what we can be. Dr. Jonathan Larson died in 1975 at the age of 84. His funeral was even larger than Dr. Hewitt's had been. And at that funeral, his eldest son, also a doctor, told the story again, because it was a story that needed to be told. A story that needed to be remembered. A story that showed what we're capable of when we put others before ourselves. The 2 wooden crosses, which Dr. Larson had retrieved from Dr. Hewitt's grave, with permission from the cemetery, were donated to the Nebraska State Historical Society. They're on display there today in a small exhibit about frontier medicine, and on the placard beside them is the story. The full story, told in detail about the doctor and the baby, the 2 blizzards, and the 30 years between them. People come from all over to see those crosses, to read that story, and many of them leave changed, because it reminds us of something essential, something we forget too easily in our modern, disconnected world. We need each other, we save each other, and the good we do never really ends. It ripples forward, touching lives we'll never meet, in ways we'll never know. Dr. Jonathan Hewitt rode through a blizzard on Christmas Eve, 1891, and saved a baby's life. He didn't do it for glory or recognition. He did it because it was right, because that baby mattered, because all life matters. And 30 years later, that baby, now a man, rode through another blizzard on the same night and saved Dr. Hewitt's life. Not because he owed a debt, but because that's what you do. You show up, you help, you care. That's the lesson. That's the point. That's what this story has to teach us. Over 100 years later, life is hard, life is brutal sometimes. There are storms we have to weather, literal and metaphorical. There are times when we're called to do difficult, dangerous things. Times when we have to risk everything for someone else. But we do it. We show up. We ride through the blizzards. We refuse to give up. We fight for each other. Because that's what makes us human. That's what gives life meaning. Not wealth or fame or comfort, but the connections we make, the lives we touch, the love we share. Dr. Hewitt and Jonathan Larson showed us that. 2 men, 2 generations, 2 blizzards, 1 truth. We are our brother's keeper. We are our sister's protector. We are all in this together, and when we remember that, when we live that, miracles happen. So I ask you now, what would you have done? If you were Dr. Hewitt, would you have ridden out into that storm for a stranger's baby? If you were Jonathan Larson, would you have risked your life to save an elderly doctor? I hope you would. I believe you would, because that capacity for courage, for selflessness, for love, it's in all of us. We just have to choose it, every day. In small ways and large, we have to choose to care, to show up, to fight for each other. That's how we honor the memory of men like Dr. Jonathan Hewitt and Dr. Jonathan Larson. Not by building monuments, but by living the way they lived, by seeing the humanity in everyone, by helping when help is needed, by refusing to give up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for letting it into your heart. And I hope when you face your own blizzard, whatever form it takes, you'll remember these two men and their Christmas Eve miracles, and you'll choose courage. You'll choose love. You'll ride into the storm, because someone needs you, and you'll show up. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Leave your like, and most importantly, share this story. Tell it to your family, your friends, your children, because stories like this need to be remembered, need to be passed down. They're the best parts of our history, the parts that show us not how brutal or cruel humans can be, but how noble, how courageous, how capable of incredible love. Tell me in the comments what state you're watching from, and tell me if you've ever had a moment when someone's kindness changed your life, or when you had the chance to return a kindness years later. I'd love to hear your stories, because this isn't just history. This is all of us. This is the human story, and it's beautiful. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring, and until next time, may you have the courage to ride into whatever storm comes your way. May you show up for the people who need you. And may you always remember that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. It ripples forward forever, just like Dr. Hewitt's did, just like Jonathan Larson's did, just like yours will too. God bless you all. Merry Christmas whenever you celebrate it. And remember, we save each other. That's what we're here for.